Welcome to the Oakwood Chapel. Gretchen, will you please say your whole name and spell it, please?
Gretchen Phillips. Well, my whole name is Clara Gretchen Phillips, but I go by Gretchen.
We are here to talk to you about your experiences in your life in Austin, Texas, within your community, and in your creative pursuits and in your relationships, however you want to talk about it.
Okay, cool.
So, tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you're born, who your people were, where you were.
Okay. Well, I was born in Galveston, Texas, BOI, but my folks, my mom and dad, came from Abilene, and they were the first, really, of their family to leave Abilene. Church of Christ, very religious on both sides, West Texas. And then Dad was in a UT medical school that's in Galveston, and we were there for my first 4 years, and then moved to Clear Lake City because Dad got a job with NASA working on the Apollo projects, because we didn't know if there would be novel bacteria, viruses, something on these moon rock samples that were coming back. So needed microbiologists to make sure that something wasn't introduced to Earth that would wipe us all out, because we had no antibodies to it. So that was really cool. He was also very into music as well, and my parents were in a band with this other couple. The band was called The Orphans, and their shtick was kind of that they played lots. My father collected and played lots of different instruments. So instead of just being a straight up folk band, he would bring out, you know, the mandolin or the bouzouki or the guitarone, or, you know. So I grew up with a lot of music around, and I grew up with a lot of science around, and my mom's an artist, so I grew up with a lot of art around.
What kind of artist was she?
Visual artist, painter. She studied with Sarah Hickman's dad. Yeah, and they're both great writers, my mom and my dad. And but because she was really interested in education, she would have like art classes for her daughters, where she would play classical music that would be the kind that is pretty evocative, like the romantic stuff. It's not Baroque, but you know, like this Flight of the Bumblebee and Peer Gynt, and ask us, well, you're listening to this, is there something that you are drawing? Are you seeing this? And so she you know, sort of pre-verbal was wanting us to think about how music gave us pictures or gave us feelings. And I would say that Mom's art also very interested in decor, was tied into education as well.
Did you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a little sister, 3 years younger, Genevieve.
So, did you stay in Galveston?
Galveston left at 4, Clear Lake City from 4 until 11 when my folks divorced. So I had the privilege of being at Clear Lake Intermediate for 6th grade, Hogg Junior High in Houston for 7th grade, and Hamilton Junior High for 8th and 9th. So I went to 3 different junior high middle schools with terrible experiences in each of them. So then we were in Houston from, I was, I guess, 12 to, I moved here a couple months before I turned 18 to Austin.
What brought you to Austin?
Well, so I went to high school for performing and visual arts in Houston for vocal music, and was really interested in music. I'd been previously really interested in theater, but I liked how music could be very direct and inexpensive, requiring very little in the way of collaboration. The production around theater was a bit off-putting to me, because very early on, I wanted to sing about lesbianism. Like when I was 12, I was just like interested in is there a way to use these songs to convey really directly So I went for music as the kind of the least expensive option of the arts. Like you just buy that one guitar and then you're set. And I always had a kind of political agenda. And I think that this ties in with the folk music that my parents played. So they had lots of songbooks that would be songs of resistance and songs of protest. They're liberal, and it was about oppression. And, I did grow up with music as a means by which you can convey ideas around an emotional component around like ideology. Like I would say that it was that. So I moved here because I heard it was a better music scene than Houston was. I wanted to be away from my family, but I didn't want to be that far.
Did you know anybody in Austin when you arrived?
Okay, so I'd spent a lot of time, I'd spent every year at the Renaissance Festival being a traveling minstrel. And through that gig, I met all these different craftspeople, and that's who I knew here. But the main person I knew here was an LSD dealer over by the ACC campus that's on, is it on 12th?
Rio Grande and 12th?
Rio Grande. And so I didn't really know anybody here except for an acid dealer. So I spent a fair amount of time. I moved here with my girlfriend at the time, Paula Newton, great painter. And we, then worked on making friends.
What part of town did you live in?
Clarksville, Castle Hill Apartments. Right by Castle Hill, right by, yeah. It was an outrageous $225 a month. Wow. 1981.
What did you do for your day jobs?
So Paula got a job at Whole Foods at Martin Brothers, and I remember that June. So we moved in May. Oh, there was the big flood of '81. So that had just happened, and the town was kind of recovering from that. The one that happened in May. And then we were here in June, and then I remember having to ask my dad for $50, which completely saved us. It's so amazing to think about, like $50 made all the difference. And then I had a moped, and I mopeded down the street to Swedish Hill to get us some baked goods, and they had a sign that they were hiring, and I got a job there. And that hooked me in with so many great people. The Swedish Hill job, I was behind the counter at work at 6 in a time of Folgers only, where the fact that it was Anderson coffee was just like a huge deal. And this croissant, what is that? So I met all the people who came for good coffee, and then the people in the kitchen itself were some more really wonderful acid dealers, and women involved with John Brown Anti-Klan, and also Est, and also major like lesbian connection. So I was able to have, via the customers, I would go to shows and I would see dancers and people, and then they would come through my line so I could talk with them. And then via my workmates, I was meeting folks. And the town was happening as far as lesbian culture is concerned.
What years were these?
I moved here in May of '81. And then I moved to Ottawa in, I guess, December of 2018. So with sojourns to like a little less than 2 years in San Francisco for like the end of the 90s. And that I literally moved all my stuff there and then moved all my stuff back. But otherwise, I have stayed in New York City and in Paris, San Francisco, but Austin, yeah. So
this was really, you were in Austin really 1981 to 2018.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, long time.
So these community members you're talking about, I'm sure had overlapping interests and groups. Can you say more of what some of the predominant themes were about?
Yeah, women's soccer teams. Oh, women's soccer. A lot of that. There was a thing on, there was something called Red River Women's Press, and that was a women's press. And they had a benefit at Liberty Lunch that was Marcia Ball, Natalie Zoe, and I think Luann Barton, that was very well attended. And so what was happening for me is that I had been out since I was 15 in Houston, which is also a very gay town. Gay radio shows, gay bookstores, everything that was happening in Montrose with the bars. So, and high school for performing and visual arts equals gay school. So I was able to have all of that, but then being with, and Renaissance Festival, a fair number of them, but being in Austin with like Women's Space, which was across from UT on the Drag, like I said, Red River Women's Press, just these parties, fundraisers, very political, anti-racist, John Brown anti-Klan. There was this, the Klan marched on Austin in the early 80s, which was very, very galvanizing for the punk scene, as well as, well, for everybody. But that was like a really big deal in terms of, it felt like a lot of things came out as a result of the Klan marching here. And I was straddling, in a way, the lesbian scene, because that was very separate from men's scene. It wasn't like a queer scene. It was like a lesbian scene. And then the punk scene, which was amazing. And that was actually where the gay boys were. But as far as like a bar, you know, where the music is, the bars would often require 3 picture IDs from women, and no one has that. So there was a lot of like, yeah, you can't come in. I need 3 forms of ID.
What kind of bars were like that?
Like the men's, like dance bars or whatever.
So the men's gay bars
were discriminatory. Yeah, yeah. So I would say that the themes were sports, racial politics, the creation of printing and tracks and visual art, certainly music. Oh my God! So we had in town, we really had this wonderful genius named Nancy Scott, who had a big following and really big following, and her shows would be so wonderfully well attended, and she's got the funny songs and she's got the heartfelt songs, and she sings so great, and she's such a wonderful, warm person. And so there was this, there could just continue to be events to go to. And then there was a women's theater company where the Hard Rock Cafe was, that space that's on San Jacinto and 6th, that was called, I think, Transact Theater Company. And I saw like women's music come through there, and they had like a really great New Year's Eve dance. And the thing is that when you're 18, 19 years old, a bar that exists for a year is huge. You know, it's not, because, I mean, I was there all the time. You know what I mean? There was the Hollywood, which was kind of the cavernous dance place. And then eventually there was Chances, which was a little bit more kind of arty.
So how was the scene between the lesbian group and the feminist group? How much overlap was that? Was it discriminatory or fluid?
I feel like I don't really know the answer, because I would have just been in the lesbian group. I mean, I will say this. There was an attempt to get some legislation regarding being able to discriminate if you suspected that someone who was wanting to be a tenant in your property was gay. Even if you suspected it, you could say, yeah, I don't want you living here. Austin Citizens for Decency, I believe, was the name of that group. And this was brought forth, and the city voted on it and voted it down. And then also, not too long after I got here is when AIDS kicked in. And AIDS was a great excuse to discriminate. It's just like, just a perfect excuse to discriminate. But what it felt like to me, because Reagan was just elected when I moved here, was that pretty much people were on the side of resistance. And that there was what is now called intersectionality. That was a no-brainer. I mean, it was just absolutely intersectional, because that was the form of feminist lesbianism that, at least in the circles I ran in, was that, racism is also an issue. This isn't just a white lady problem. So that was always a part of what we were thinking about in my particular group, which is not to say that there wasn't a tremendous amount of beer that was also consumed inside of, this. But I didn't feel, as far as like where there was resistance or discrimination, that was like this long-standing feud between the punks and the frats, between young Republicans and the punks, Reaganites and yuppies who were ruining the town, that, but not, I don't recall a version of infighting. That's not, but I mean, I literally worked at restaurants where that wasn't really happening. And I did not go to UT, so I don't really know.
Did you go to college?
Nah. I thought I was going to go to Berklee College of Music after spending a year here, but then I was just having so much fun and my bands were doing great. So I went to ACC, took some classes, and I'm 2/3 through with a program in Ottawa in cabinet making and furniture technician. But the pandemic meant that we were taking all these classes online that was so BS that I'm going to wait until I can be in person for that final excellent semester.
Of course. So I'm really curious about how your friendship network grew.
Well, major hub would be a genius named Kay Turner, who was getting her PhD in poetry and folklore at UT, who came through Swedish Hill and wanted some coffee. There was a long line out the door, because there would be on weekends, and I was walking by, and I have a nose fetish, and she has a great nose. And I'd probably seen her maybe at some dances or something, and I overheard her saying, I don't want to wait in line, I just want a cup of coffee. And so I said, I'm going in there right now, ma'am. Can I get you a cup of coffee? What do you want? And I got her a cup of coffee, and then she showed up at the end of a shift at some point with a bottle of, maybe with a 6-pack, and said, thank you for that, I'd like to take you out. And I was like, I don't drink beer, but bring some wine. So she came back, we had some wine by some pier. I've long tried to remember, she'll remember where it is, a pier where we sat and we just talked in a way that we've never stopped. So I think I was maybe just turned 18. And we talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked until dusk, when we could tell, oh, we're in a tricking park. We could see that, oh, okay, we didn't even realize we'd been in a gay boy tricking park. And then the clouds literally formed without fail. I mean, anybody could see that this was a phoenix rising from the clouds. And we have been in love platonically since then. And she's 15 years older, and she was tied in with everybody. She knows everybody, and she knows everything from the minutia of cars to the minutia of Jesus Christ and witches and tons of music. So through her, she started letting this 18-year-old, when she was like 30-something, but she would sometimes say, and I would just be at the party drinking Shiner Bock and listening while her friends just talked about things. And I had always read The New Yorker and Village Voice and, I was no dummy when it came to culture. And so I was in with them in regards to all of these versions of a kind of artistic networking through theater, through dance. And she was just a huge conduit for me in regards to a kind of older crowd. But another huge part of my life was the punk scene, was just going to shows, going to punk shows, and wonderful people that I met at the shows. Then we would go to a party, or I would meet wonderful girls just in the bathroom line. I mean, the role of the bathroom line as far as friendship, bonding, and all of that, you know. And then we would all meet up at Les Amis, or you would go to Les Amis to be young and writing late into the night and drinking and smoking and writing, and it was 24 hours, so here's everybody. And the thing is that there was a time when literally if you had a mohawk or your jacket had like a punk name on the back or something, you could talk with folks, and it was possible. There was just a brief little period of, who knows, 6 months before it got really hardcore, where, you know, you could talk to somebody who was possibly really on your wavelength.
What are some other friendship gestures?
I don't think I know what you mean by friendship gestures.
Well, like, friendship gestures are like...
how you put it out there?
Yeah, an invitation that can sometimes be unique to you or within a culture that's like a signal.
Well, postering, I remember that Meet Joy didn't even have any gigs yet, but we made posters. Or we were between gigs or something and we made posters. Definitely going to the drag and putting up posters, you were going to run into people. Because even though I didn't go to UT, it was such a hub, UT was, for the friends that I was meeting in clubs and stuff, that I, you know, would run into people. Hanging out at the record store, huge. One time, my girlfriend Teresa and I were walking up Lamar to Castle Hill Apartments, holding hands, and this would have probably been 1982, and a straight couple pulled over. I mean, back when this town was dead, you know, and they said, "Do y'all need a ride?" And we wanted a ride. So we got a ride with the guy who owned Waterloo Records. And he told us that we had to go see the Roaches. And I knew who the Roaches were, but I really wasn't sort of in going into my folk side. But he was like, "No, you need to get tickets and go see the Roaches," which was a huge thing for me. So there were ways of being visible as a person who worked at Swedish Hill. There were ways of being visible as a person, you know, holding hands circa 1982 with a girl who was brave enough and willing enough to do that. I don't know. I mean, it was just basically going out and seeing music all the time, you know, and going to theater pieces. And then I'm just friendly, you know, and I do want to talk. And I'm terrible at small talk, so it gets real pretty quick. And then the more friends I made, the more they introduced me to other wonderful people. And also Michigan Women's Music Festival I started going to. So then that became an international pen pal, you know, and people saying, "You can come stay with me in Seattle," blah, blah, blah. So I would say that something that's very important to me is friends from the job, friends from work, friends from the restaurant work, friends from the day, from the shift, you know, and also getting somebody else, "Hey, I hear you're between jobs. I mean, we need a dishwasher." And then they move from dishwasher to prep to, you know, and so those ways that restaurants functioned as like amazing meeting spaces and like melting pot of, and there was just a lot of queers in this town.
Was there any time you didn't want to be seen? Like you're talking about the ways you presented yourself and carried yourself in the world to be seen. Was there any time that you didn't, moments, circumstances, or eras you didn't want to be seen?
I don't recall that, especially in my youth. I was eating this world alive. No, I was eating it all the time.
So where do you think you got that fearlessness from and that courage? Because not everyone just has that. And if that is just innate to you.
My mom says it is. Yeah. My mom says it is.
How does she describe you?
Curious, smart, and fearless. I was an avid reader, and I often would rather be someplace else. When I was young, there was a lot of getting lost in literature to be transported to what felt like more freedom. Huckleberry Finn was just a pain to me that I couldn't run away. And I did once run away when I was 7 and go along the railroad track. And I wanted to, there was a book, a Newbery Award winner called Adam of the Road, and he was a minstrel who traveled, and I wanted to travel. I just really, really wanted to travel. But I also was afraid of being, female, and I knew that, I was vulnerable as a result. So when I was a kid, I was mad about being female, very, very mad about it, and would pray at night, God, just, I just want to wake up a boy. Because it really felt like, I see now that like sexism was the thing. I would say that is what it felt like. It just felt like sexism was the only thing in my way. And that I could do anything, and I had so much bravery. And the you can't, you're a girl, that was rampant in the 60s and 70s as just what you said to girls. There was definitely no girl power. There were no girls' rock camps. There was no Powder Puff Girls. There was just advertising about, a fort that some boys had made with a casual sign that says no girls allowed. So the price of admission to be able to be with boys. It's kind of like what happened at my opening the other night. Actually, I could cry a little bit about this. At my opening the other night, there were so many straight guy friends. And I was like, I did it. I just want to be friends with people, and I want to be a friend. And so the way that I would be friends when we were really young, and then the boys would get it in their head that something had shifted and I couldn't be, or now are teasing like, ooh, Gretchen loves Andrew, and just this whole other thing that had, and I couldn't relate to it. It had no genuine resonance for me. And it was just continuing to get in the way. And something about a PC lesbian separatism, which is what I was growing into here. I resisted it. I just resisted it. I was not going to say that men are evil. And that I would say that sexism is not good for anyone. That the lie that it's good for men it's terrible. It's not good for them. They're, But that, I would say, has always been very strong for me, is both really literally, absolutely a love for my girls, for my buddies, my best friends, and that, but then also wanting to be with guys and I haven't wanted to be one of the boys forever. I'm like, probably since I was, let's say, 20 or 21, that has not been my dream, to wake up and be male. But to be friends with a guy who we are friends and it doesn't enter his mind to come on to me, but we just get to have and enjoy each other, that always feels like such a win, that I could be important to them. And they can be important to me, and that we don't have to ruin it.
You're just people together.
That's so simple, but so everything for me.
I don't know how you would say this. I'm trying to come up with the right words. For me, it was a combination of you can't because you're a girl, and you're unsafe due to power dominance and rape.
Yeah, exactly.
And not having any agency to change either of those things.
Right.
So how did that affect if those are your words, you say it in the way you would put it instead of my words. But there's also how that affects how you inhabit this gendered body.
I think I've inhabited this gendered body many ways, many times, through the years as styles change. In high school, I had this really tight danskin top, and I had big elephant bells, and I had my big shoes, and I spent forever figuring out my earrings every morning, and I had long hair with wings, and, you know, it was kind of it's, you know, I like a costume. So there's a fair amount of laziness that has just kept me in, you know, shorts and t-shirts in Austin, Texas. Another reason why I moved, to be able to bring in new things like sweaters and jackets. But, you know, in the history of my life, many a dress and many different hairstyles, you know, I think a lot of hair failures. I'd say I've had a lot of hair fails. But once I came up with the tall Ann Richards, you know, once I started just like trying to channel Ann Richards, I think I've been okay. But I think that how the female body gets how the female body gets, you know, presents or whatever over the course of a lifetime is an ever-shifting thing. One of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about the women's soccer was that the straight women's soccer players of Austin, Texas, 1981 did not shave their legs. This was a female hairy-legged town, but it didn't mean what it could mean elsewhere that meant you were a lesbian. It didn't necessarily mean that. And then going to Michigan Women's Music Festival and getting to see people from all these other places with all their different sort of sartorial choices and, you know, body. Michigan was hugely important for me because I just saw a lot of naked female bodies, a ton. So that has meant that there's not much I haven't seen. So I know that I know a lot is actually okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine. But I don't know, I didn't pay attention to my body as a cigarette smoking person. You know, it really wasn't until I quit that I was able to kind of claim it, I think. I was just pushing it aside mostly.
What age did you start thinking about your health and your body?
I quit right before I turned 30 because I realized that I wasn't probably not going to die before I turned 30. And that everything that I had just assumed and knew with all my heart seemed to be completely wrong. And that even though I knew I was going to die young, I looked like I was going to make it all the way to 30. And then under those circumstances, if I didn't want to die of emphysema, which I could easily have done, then I just wanted to get hit by a truck so that it would be more rapid. And then I thought, really, are those your only choices? Those are your only choices. Like, best case scenario, you get hit suddenly by a truck like Gaudi, versus a slow, painful emphysema death, or is there something else you could do, Gretchen? So, you know, getting into my lungs, doing Kundalini yoga, doing yoga and having my lungs was, I would say, the beginning of the next part of my life.
Did that change your singing?
Absolutely got better. Absolutely got better, yes.
So what would then the next part of your life, what would the chapter of that book be?
Well, being with Ann. So I got with Ann, and we both smoked a ton. And then after about 2 years, we quit. And then we had to learn how to eat. Because when you smoke all the time, you don't have to know how to eat. So then that would have been the next thing, is eating. So that's when I became a better cook. And also, for me, swimming and biking were very, very important. I love to bike and I love to swim. So taking that love of LSD and trying to put it into a physical experience, with yoga or with swimming, trying to take that, leaving a certain part of my brain and expanding it via exercise. So I'd say that would be the next part.
So many questions in that. So you met Ann in your late 20s?
Yeah, I met Ann.
How did that happen?
I'd seen her around. I was on stage with Girls in the Nose at Chances, and she was in the audience. And the town was small enough that New Girl was sticking out like a tall, sore thumb with a big nose. And I was like, when the show was over, I said to Kay, who knows everything, "Who's that?" She was like, "That's new UT professor, Ann Svekovich, in the English department. She knows Ella." she knows Trace and Lee, and I was like, ooh, that girl is hot. But I was with someone, and I felt like she might be too tempting, so I didn't want to talk to her. So I would see her around town, but I would never try to talk to her. Then I broke up with that problematic person, and then I was free to get with her, but she was nowhere to be found because, unbeknownst to me, she'd gone to Westland for a year. So while she was there, I got with another problematic girl, and then she came back to town, and then she was just around all the time, and I would be like, I want to talk to her. Go talk to her. Talk to her tonight. Talk to her tonight. Gretchen, go talk to her tonight. But I chickened out over and over until there was this really good event in the park. What's the park that they just redid that's on Red River?
The Waterloo Park?
Yes, Waterloo Park, thank you. They would have during this legislation when gay pride was, I don't know, tied to politics, which it is not now at all. We know how good our frickin' politics were back then. Anywho, back when it was tied to the state ledge, there were marches and performances, and Two Nice Girls and Girls in the Nose played. And there was ACT UP had a safe sex booth, and I saw that she was manning that booth, and so I went to her with the great line, "Got a light," which she did. And then we started talking, and then we never stopped. And then we really never stopped. Took a while to get together, but 30 and a half years of a good thing. And I would say that completely changed my life. And it changed my life in a way that shifted ambition regarding touring and being famous and leaving and making my mark in the world, which was very important to me. I was still very busy touring and recording with Two Nice Girls when I got with Anne. Going on tour and missing her so much, unlike the other girls who I didn't really miss because it was so nice to have a break from the fighting. Since Anne and I don't fight, it was just like, ugh, I miss her terribly. And so that next part of my life has been huge about who am I if what feels like a capitulation to coupledom, outside of a kind of autonomy that's like important to me as a lesbian feminist, but can I make this woman be important? And can I make our domesticity be important? And can I just have her be like a factor in the decision making I make? That took decades to be okay with. And it still is alive in me, what it means to not feel like she completes me by a long shot, but always our deal was that we're lab partners. Always that's just been our deal of like, what's the data? What is this? And then we go back and forth regarding the data and be lab partners and report back, honestly. But it's in the songs. It's been a torture. It's been a wonderful torture, but it's been hard.
So you were here till 2018.
Yeah.
How has the city changed? And of course, that's a very broad question, but especially the sort of queer, gay, and lesbian scene in the town. How have you noticed that's changed since the 80s?
Well, it felt to me like there was a certain cultural centrality to the queers. You had a punk scene that was dominated by gay men. Biscuit of the Big Boys, Gary Floyd of the Dicks. They were the kings, they were the undisputed kings. And so that opened up a ton of space. Then the lesbian culture was alive and well in all of these ways that I'm laying out regarding events, activities, and spaces. And when the Austin Chronicle came along, because it came along right around the time that I moved here, it did chronicle these things. There was a kind of, again, a kind of queer centrality where the ratio of who we were to the number of humans in the town was high. So another huge thing was, again, because of AIDS and because of really major discrimination on the part of like the fraternal organizations and queers and stuff, was that there was a lot of hostility and thinking about, for example, my girlfriend's like introduction to LGBTQ studies, like the equivalent at UT in the 80s, if a person saw a friend come out of that class, they would be like, what are you doing in that class? Whereas her class now could be largely straight people. That is a huge change. And that was what I personally was working on. That was a huge part of my agenda with Meet Joy, and then very specifically with Two Nice Girls, was a thing that you tell yourself, which is like, I don't have anything against lesbians, I just don't even know any. It's like, well, you do know me, and let me tell you about my life. And that lesbian visibility is actually going to manifest in something really positive in terms of just getting to that peoplehood that we were discussing, where this is not some weird other, this is a person, and it's very possible that we have great things in common. So what has happened is that has happened in a really big way. That's very exciting, but it also can mean a certain, and this isn't terrible, but it is just the whole, the saline solution is even more diluted. But I do think that gender binaries are a terrible problem. And so these disruptions, I think, are incredibly important. So I could give up lesbian space starring just lesbians instead of like well-meaning allies crowding everybody out. I personally can sacrifice that for these allies being unafraid to be tarnished, by associating with queers. Also, a lot of things have changed in terms of just thinking of lesbians in terms of porn, where there's more about like what lesbians actually think about, and other things we have to offer besides like, jerk-off material. That's huge. But in general, with the entire town, largely when it became Parenting Magazine's best place to raise your kids, that's going to be a lot of straight people coming here. And when it's a tech town, certainly lots of queers are involved in tech, but we don't wield the kind of power that we had as far as being a, pretty, higher proportion of sort of voices, invisible voices as we were. And there are many factors, including, again, just the specificity of Cheer Up Charlie's being for everybody. Whereas Chance's largely, for most of its time, kind of was not. And so I'm okay with evolution. Like, I don't need it to be like this was a wonderful thing and it needs to be encased in amber for the rest of my life, because nothing works that way. My whole point as I age is how can I be flexible and how can I expand? Part of flexibility is being able to be expansive. What I don't want to do is calcify and get constricted and restricted. And so if it's, kind of the more the merrier, may a thousand flowers bloom, because that is actually what I want. This gender binary is atrocious, because it also sets up many other binaries. It's very foundational to, I just can't relate because you're whatever, a different race or a Republican. I don't want to settle for that personally.
I know there's plenty out there in theory and in culture and in the media about this, but I'm curious about how you think about gender spectrum, body identity, who you're attracted to, like, because it's really not all in one bucket anymore.
Which is so great.
So how do you think about those different internal versus external ways of non-binary gender?
Well, I think that people will I'm assuming that, based only on my own life, but in the life of my girl and other people that I'm close to, is that we go through evolutions, and big parts of evolutions can be staying in a place in a really strong way where we know we're going to be there forever, and then we're actually not. So I have known really intense, what I would say would be like really big time femmes who now are really big time butches, and I don't think that there's some way they should have been, like I'm really for things shifting, changing, and growing. So I remember what it feels like to be denied running around without my shirt on, even though I was still flat chested, because that was I was too old now. And in my dreams, people are free to learn, to experience states of learning where it isn't that they're being shamed out of what it is by other people who are telling them what their experience should be. Well-meaning, not well-meaning, knee-jerk, any of that. I remember my mom saying, like, I want to spare you the misery that I went to. Don't do that. And it's like, well, that's actually not how I learn, And so, I belong to a pretty self-righteous group called lesbians who can be really hectoring and really tell you what. And I don't really care for that part of it, because it isn't, I don't really know somebody else's trip. Like I don't know it, and I think it's a trip. So I'm delighted if gender roles are going to be slipping and sliding around. I don't care about language and semantics. That's not a hill I'm going to die on. That they is plural, and that's come up with something else. And I don't want to be disrespectful to folks because they're asking for more than it feels like I was given when I was that age. Because I think that's part of it. Sometimes people can begrudge, like, I didn't have that freedom. You don't get to have that freedom. Whereas the point for me is like, let me try to clear a clearer path for you so that you can go beyond me. Go beyond me. I don't need to be in the front. Go beyond me. And you go out there and then tell me what you see.
It sounds so much to me like what you're just talking about is acceptance and tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Straight, regular old acceptance and tolerance.
Yeah.
Maybe you learned that in your family culture growing up?
I think so. I think so. Kind of yes and no. I feel like I've been blessed with a really strong moral compass. I have always, talked to God, with God being, as a child, my mom saying, God is everywhere and God is love. So I think that being able to have a whole other version of a universe that I can converse with and go, okay, what? And this is troubling, what? Because it's not like I don't have a host of problems, and it's not like I'm always accepting and tolerant. I'm currently on Zoloft. I think that makes a huge difference for my accepting tolerance, instead of just, being kind of indignant. I've certainly gone through those phases. But the thing is that it isn't, I'm not the boss. I'm just not the boss of anybody, And I didn't want my mom to just think I was an extension of her, because I'm not. I'm myself. And people are themselves, and creatures are themselves. And I do have a thing that's innate in me that is, I think being respectful feels really hot to me. Like, I really like being respectful. I really like seeing it, studying it, being respectful of a dog, a puppy with a ton of energy that needs to run around. The dog, it needs to do that in order to grow well. So then we need to figure out how to make that happen. It's not that there's nothing wrong. You know, children defecating in their pants, nothing wrong with that. You know, people, you know, feeling confined against ridiculous rules and busting free, possibly in some messy ways. Yeah, that happens. I certainly, you know, I don't have a vision of like some perfect way for it to be, but I do have an idea of how I'd like to live my day, and I don't want to be in combat all the time.
So, when we were talking about tolerance and other things about when you were coming to Austin, you were talking about psychedelics. So, do you think your chemical experimentation, as well as your attention to your health in other years, has helped you change your perception of the world? In terms of like, did taking LSD make you a more tolerant person, or were you tolerant and so you took LSD?
Well, I mean, of course it's hard to know because we never have that other version to contrast it with, right? So I just have what I have been. I feel like having a microbiologist dad who was working on space, I feel like that is huge for my view of, do you know the Eames short film, Power of 10? It's basically that. And so it is interesting to me how psychedelics can kind of create space. I don't do them anymore, and I'm fine if I never ever do them again, because I don't have to do everything that I loved, keep doing it. But I feel like what's useful for me is if I'm really in a problem is always to be able to pull the lens back, as they do in Power of 10. Of course, it happens very rapidly, but if one can imagine that you hung out and saw a little bit better what the problem is, these interpersonal dynamics is really largely what I'm thinking about. Pull it back and see, and then you pull it back, and eventually you just see an ant bed. And it's like, it's not really any more or less meaningful than that. That humans collide with each other, and lots of creatures do, and this is how it is. So I think that definitely what is useful to me for navigating the planet in this lifetime and what is hard is to be able to try to both be the microbiologist and the macrobiologist. I think about my gut health and getting it strong as creating a whole nother world full of immigrants who are not Gretchen Phillips DNA, you know? So I can't do great if I was just purely Gretchen Phillips DNA. The system wouldn't work. I have to have the friendly bacteria, the other virus. I have to have other things living inside of me. So yeah, I mean, I think probably my drug use helped, and also I found other people, you know, with whom to riff with on these topics. But then I'm also happy with like, yeah, I don't really want to do that anymore because I don't want to deal with the recovery, or I don't want to, and there's breathing exercises that I can do that can help me pull out. There's meditations. You know, mainly I just want to be a person who can change. You know, I don't want to just stay the same at all. I don't.
Tell me about some of your surprises then.
Of changing?
Yeah. Or things that you experienced that helped you change. Because sometimes it's hard to change by ourselves.
Well, I mean, I do operate well with disincentives. And also with somebody just unattractively doing something where I'm like, note to self, don't do that. So I did have a gang of, you know, older artist friends who, when I was in my 30s and they were in their 40s, they seemed to be getting really rigid. And they weren't sort of we're all in this together. But I found them being maybe short with the cab driver or something in this way where it's like, I don't want to be like that. And so I just had a sort of general plan to try to be flexible and not constrict. So that's like really conscious because of this disincentive. So there are definitely things that I literally find unattractive where I'm like, you know what, don't do that if you can help it. So that's one example. And also just giving myself challenges. Like, I hadn't really thought about men being cute. It's not something that I wanted to think about. And then there was this period of time where I was like, well, go ruminate on that. If you think he's cute, why don't you just see what happens? I think it's largely that. Like, do I let myself ruminate in different places? Oh, the role that Jesus plays for me now. I mean, I had no relationship to Jesus. And then read the Gnostic Gospels, read about the law of love versus the law of laws, think about how this can help me relate to my family members who talk about Jesus, where I'm like, I know, I agree. When he did this and this, and then here we are agreeing. I didn't see that coming because I was going to be like this, but trying to find where I can go in rather than state my place and make you come in with me. I think that that's part of being a performer, is like, I'm here and it's out there for you. But what's pleasurable for me, really, as a person, as a performer, in terms of the audience interaction that we always had with Meet Joy, and the go-go dancing we would have in Two Nice Girls, where we'd call someone up from the audience, and Disco Plague, is I want it to be that this is a thing that we're making together. I don't really want you just to be watching me and I'm pontificating. I really do want to be in it. And so I need to learn ways of putting people at ease, making people comfortable to where they, want to be with me. With, of course, the knowledge that not everybody is gonna, but thinking in those terms. So I would say, yeah. Those are some examples.
That really fits with your definition of a good day.
Yeah.
Of having those titillating conversations, or
yeah.
I'm not sure what word you were used, but like
yeah.
meaningful conversations
yeah.
and connection.
Yeah. And I have to say, it's often tied to retail for me. It's often the checkout person. It's often the grocery store. That was very hard for me to have moved to a brand new part of town in Ottawa when the pandemic came, when I just wanted to go. There's two really good thrift stores right by me. And I love to buy a camera for $15 and have the cashier talk to me about, I took photography in high school, and I don't think that's what this person's going to say. And this is what they're saying. And then I want to, have a major convo with them about it. And I want to encourage them to get another one, tell them where to go to get film. It's not that hard. What do you think you'd want to shoot? I just want to interact. I want to be in the world.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk more about Anne? Are you married?
We did get married for the health insurance. We didn't get married because we felt romantically attached to it. But when it became legal, it was going to make a big difference in terms of what she had to pay UT for my health insurance. And we got married at Michigan Women's Music Festival, the very last performance of the very last year. And so our marriage certificate is from Oceana County, and we're both Cancers. So that's even better than Travis County. And it was pop-up. No one knew we were getting married. And we were naked except for garlands of the ferns that grow up in those parts. And we began by talking about how ambivalent we are about marriage, to an audience nodding their heads about their ambivalence as well. So I'd say it was a really pretty best case scenario. I was also married to Teresa Taylor in a backyard in East Austin that we walked past on Saturday, and I took pictures from each way to show them that that house is still there. And then I was also married in my childhood park in Clear Lake City to my first wife, Paula. So I have been married 3 times. I don't know that I'll be married a 4th, though.
I'm just curious about how, once you started talking to Anne and never stopped, that, you know, just as marriage is both the flesh and the law, right? Or a partnership is both internal and external, that you all discussed it, were out about it, were not out about, like, how, what kind of couple were you in the world, and how did you define it internally and externally?
Well, we're a couple where the deal that we made was, I'm going to do what I want to do, you do what you want to do. Where our paths are together, awesome. Where our paths diverge, awesome. I'm going to tell you what I want to do as soon as I know it, and you tell me. I'm not going to read your mind, so don't ask me to read your mind. You need to be able to say it. And because of that thing I was saying about respect, and because of how much I respect her, if she wants to do something that will leave me out or kind of whatever, I'm fine with that. And I think vice versa. You know, it isn't, I don't feel like we're very melded. We didn't live together the first 10 years of our relationship. But yeah, we were out. We call each other girlfriends because that's hotter to me than other things. Wife is not that hot to me. Wife was hot in a transgressive 80s way. It's not hot now to me, possibly because I'm older too. You know, it is kind of transgressive at 21 to mention your wife. But my sister's 5 children have always known Anne. She has been in their lives their whole life. And her family, I love them and they love me. And that isn't something that I really had in the same way with any other girlfriend before. And for our 15th anniversary, we got a really nice cake from Balthazar in New York, and we had written on it, "Thank you, friends," because that's the cornerstone of the relationship. And I remember the cake decorator arguing with us about it. When it's like, it's your 15th anniversary, don't thank you, friends. It's like, do what we tell you, and also this is the thing. You know, the friendship networks, me getting to see people love her, oh my God. I mean, I love people loving her. And I love what's important to her. People who have like really different values, and I've had that with girls. I mean, certainly not Republican and Democrat, but a version. We really share values. Like, we really share values. I'm super lucky in that regard. And also, I decided to be honest. I used to try to kind of spare girls the total truth, not about fucking around, but maybe about how I felt or something. But it didn't ever work, and I made a decision with her to go ahead and tell the truth. And that was a very conscious decision, and it has worked out great because she can handle the truth. And she's not really easily offended. And I can kind of freak out, and then she's like, I still think I'm the best person for you, Gretchen. She said that on many occasions over the course of the last 30 years, and it's been really useful for it to be like, okay, that's all right. Well, then that's a mooring. I will, tether myself to your certainty, even if I feel like I'm uncertain. So I'm not really uncertain. I mean, it's interesting to age. And it's interesting to move to a town where we don't really know anybody and then have it be a pandemic for 2/3 of it. It's been a lot of us time. But we do have 3 cats who are a fuck of a lot easier than kids. And, you know, so, and we do a lot of travel when we can. And you know, again, there's much that's shared for us. But I feel like what's important to me is that I feel like I can be respectful because I feel like I have so much. I don't begrudge the world because I have a lot. So, you know, you can have room for all of that because I've got so much. I really feel that way. I mean, when I think, last night I was listening to some Two Nice Girls, and, you know, Lori Freelove's dead, but I was listening to her contribution, and then I was remembering the rehearsals, and I was like, God, this is so cool I got to do this. And the first album, which I don't really like, but I was listening to it last night, and I was like, this is actually kind of cool art rock. I heard it with new ears last night. And this was because I had just been listening to a new track that I'm on with these gay boyfriends in Palm Springs, where they wanted me to sing on an X song, and here's my little backing vocals. And then here's Me Joy wanting, and I'm like, and I've got my text from my bandmate from Now. It's like, I've got so much wonderful stuff going on. Do I begrudge Anne a million wonderful things? Hell no. Please, go out, do it. Do it. It takes you away from me. Whatever, that's fine.
I also want to ask you about your ideas about spirituality and how you experience that. So if those are in any way related, go for it.
Well, again, Mom said to a child, God is everywhere and God is love. And so I just took that verbatim. And then it's kind of like red light means don't go through the intersection. You know, it was just these things that you are like, this is how the world works. So I have always just compared how I feel against this idea, which is a really convenient idea and it works great for me, as though the force of that green that buds through somehow has love in it. Now, I don't know if it does or doesn't, but I prefer to imbue it with an idea of love. I don't really know truth, but I know preference. So I just go with my preference, because I don't know absolute truth. But my preference is that there are many dimensions, and that there's infinity, and that matter is neither lost nor gained. And so I am not afraid to die. I think it will be a transformation. I was never afraid of heaven and hell, really, because it just rang false to me. So there's a lot to me about, again, a kind of inner compass that I compare things to and then I decide. Even if it's something that I said I would never do, and here I am, taking care of my homophobic mom. She's not homophobic now, but she was really mean to me. But I'm the primary caregiver, and not because I feel obligated, but because that's actually what I want to do. So I feel like listening to the things that draw me is important, like just contemplating this tree. We can contemplate every knot because this is where, you know, a limb came out. And how much life was on that limb? How many birds, how many bugs, fungal, like just the universes. I just basically trip out on all the universes. And I feel like it's forever, that there's forms of activity that are just forever. And so my spirituality is that I don't have to steer the ship, but I can be, you know, in the water and in the tide as it's moving along. And again, I have a little piece of granola bar stuck. You know, it's just some force lets me get Kay Turner that cup of coffee at that point and then have it be what it is now. And every, fossil fuels is formerly organic matter. I mean, that's what fossil fuels are. They're fossils of plants and the energy from the sun. I mean, it's incredible how this stuff, so energetically, I'll be fed upon when I die, but how can I be fed upon now? Who can feed on me now? That's what I want, is like, and I think that's what, a version of an art that lives in a home. Like, I want to price those photos to move, because what if this means something? And certainly records and songs. I mean, that's huge. Like, if my song is in somebody's head, then energetically, like, how is somebody then, and how does that become a version of a kind of fuel for whatever? I don't know, but I think it's just that sense that there's connection, and there might be ways to sort of navigate through it in a pleasurable way. But I was also born, I mean, when I get my chart done, they're just like, you're a spiritual artist. So, I mean, is that what you're doing? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And they're like, okay, well, that's what you're supposed to do. And it's like, okay, I'm good. So I'm just a spiritual artist.
You have worked between a lot of different mediums, so then would you define your medium as that connection?
Yeah, making the connection with the tools. Like, I really love making connections with the cameras. And I love that as a machine. I love a camera machine. I love the lens. Everything I have is used.
When was the first time you remember coming to Oakwood Cemetery, if you can remember it?
I mean, I don't think I'm going to remember my first time. I did used to run around here back when I ran. And of course the foxes. I have biked alongside foxes running over there. And just, I mean, you get why it's called Foxy. The creature is just magnificent. But I mean, I've lived in East Austin since '85, so I don't remember the first time. But I'm really drawn to graveyards, so I'm sure I came right away.
So tell us about some other experiences with graveyards.
Yeah, I love graveyards. Well, as I said, when I was a child in Galveston, my recollection is that they're above ground because of flooding, like they are in New Orleans, and that these mounds are quite close together. It's really jam-packed, and there's very white. And then there's these like angels, like big statues. Oh, I just loved walking around there when I was a kid. The graveyards in Paris, I've hit those on numerous occasions. I also really love when the stuff gets really worn, to where it's gotten more and more flat. Of course, engraving font, as that changes over time, and also the styles that change when the fonts change, or then that thing that started happening that's kind of like the cake that has the picture on it, where it's the headstone that has the picture on it. I remember when I first started seeing those. I love when a tree is just growing through somebody's body. It's so old and they're just coming through. And I love thinking about being told of someone. I can't be reminded. Like, I remember being on Block Island in Rhode Island and looking at this little graveyard with these ancient graves across the street from some party that I was at. Maybe I had like some social awkwardness, so I went to walk around in the graveyard, and they were, 17th century graves, and I don't have any relationship to these people, but in this moment, I'm being asked to remember. Like, that's why it's even there. It's like, well, remember this person or know of their existence. I think that these kind of flash reverberations of an attempt to be remembered, specifically as this name, 60 years, 17 days, it's something really specific. It's like so interesting. it's very interesting when stuff is really gendered, where the guy gets you get to talk about the guy and she's a loving wife. We don't know anything about her. That happens. San Antonio for holidays, when there are plates of food, Thanksgiving. I've gone to many and just these ways of a kind of visitation. Cremation has never been interesting to me. That kind of like being spread. I feel like location, even just sort of as a not a hellmouth, but because I don't think it's the hellmouth, but by that I mean this portal, like this place that may or may not be to this other world, but therein lies the body. Although, of course, that's what's also interesting about urns and about some scandal that's occurred regarding cremated remains, where that's not even your mom. This stuff is something else. But yeah, the corporeal, and then with trees. So you have however long a person's going to last, but then you have trees that are going to last longer lifetimes. So then you have that kind of temporal relativity of time, just these different times. And then you have all the insects and all the ants that live there. And it's just, and I like that they're quiet. I like that you're not supposed to do what I found myself doing, which was looking for this with X blaring in my truck as I drove through a graveyard. I was eventually like, roll your window up and turn this down. It's probably not polite, even though there was no one here. I like the quiet, and I like what will always be unknown history. It's an archive with some signifiers, but we're never really going to know. But some people are saying, this is important enough to spend a bunch of money because this person was important to us. But we will never really know because time has gone by. I don't know, I just think it's really cool. They're portals.
So, are there people who've passed that you remember quite fondly?
My first wife, she died right before her birthday in 2020 rather, right when the pandemic was first hitting. So we moved here together. We were lovers in high school, and then we moved here together. And then we were platonic roommates later when I was with Anne, and she's just really important. She gave me my first SLR for my 17th birthday, and it's terrible. I've never been to a memorial because it was the pandemic. I mean, nothing. I've had no closure with friends on this incredibly important person.
Where was she living when she died?
Houston. Yeah, she was from Houston. We moved here to Austin. She got her undergrad in art at UT, and then she went back for her painting degree at U of H. Then she worked at the CAM. Then she worked for Glass Tire for a long time.
What was her name?
Paula Newton. But that's hard because of the amount of sex that we had and like really knowing her body, and then for that body to just not even be here. That's terrible. But I know a lot of people who've died. Because of going to a gay high school. So just really good singers in my school who died of AIDS because they were just having regular old sex. That happened with young bodies, and then the old bodies and wrecks and ODs and a couple of murders. Yeah. But as far as a grave that I go to, now that I think of it, there's not one. There's not a
collective.
Yeah, and I don't even really know where these are. I suppose my dad's in Abilene. I mean, I was there, but it's not a thing where I go there.
Yeah.
So there's not a grave that I visit, except for the cats in the backyard on Robinson, and I do visit those. And sometimes think about digging them up.
Disinter the cats.
Sometimes I think about it, but I don't really want to.
So, There have been many iterations of yourself, and there are probably some more to come.
Hope so.
So how would you like to be remembered?
You know, it's funny because I settled for a long time on she was a good friend. That I just wanted to say that. And then during the pandemic, I was like, I don't know if I am a good friend because I wasn't reaching out and I was averting. I had an aversion. But I want to return to trying for that one, for that she was a good friend, because I can be kind of inside my own sorrow in a certain way, and I want to be out in the world. So I've thought of that one for a number of years, and I still am interested in that one. She was a good friend. Yeah, I like that one. Thank you for asking.
So I like to think of the present as a stopping place between the past and the future. So do you have any messages from the past that you'd like to bring into the present to share for posterity?
I do think that this Buddhist book that I'm reading is really clever in terms of saying that there's noticing, if one can, you know, what you really like, what you really don't like, your aversions, and then, the delusion that you can control all of this stuff. So I think that my advice to me with returning to Ottawa that may be under siege and returning to a job that is physically quite taxing, and going to a town that I don't have a million friends, and the uncertainty about this planet, and all of those things is to merely try, if I can, to be aware and to notice this desire to sort of dictate the terms of life, rather than what I did as a kid in Clear Lake, where I would just lie down in a field and watch the ants, and I could do that for a long time. And in a way, that's how I'd like to finish life, is just watching us ants and not being super invested in, because we will all die, and then I think all the cards will be shuffled again. I'm not afraid of that for any of us, really.